The weight of the legacy felt heavier than the Mont Blanc pen in Mandy Campbell's hand. Seated at the head of a mahogany dining table polished to a mirror shine, she surveyed her kingdom. Her 3 sons Gary, Andy, and Zach sat on one side, their expressions a carefully curated blend of solemnity and anticipation. Their wives, perched beside them, were less adept at hiding their avarice. Their eyes glittered. On the other side of the vast table, isolated by a chasm of empty chairs, sat her daughter, Dorothy. Mandy cleared her throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "As you all know," she began, her voice the familiar instrument of command that had built Campbell Industries from the ground up, "I've decided it's time to secure the family's future." She slid the first portfolio across the table toward her eldest. "Gary, the company is yours. Campbell Industries. Its assets, its future, all of it. You will be the new chairman." Gary's face broke into a broad, practiced smile. He placed a hand over his heart. "Mum, I'm speechless. I won't let you down. We'll take care of you." Always, his wife, Chloe, squeezed his arm, her diamond rings flashing like a victory signal. Mandy offered a thin, satisfied smile and pushed a smaller, yet still substantial, portfolios toward her other sons. "Andy, the properties on the coast. Zach, the city real estate portfolio. They will provide for you both handsomely." The aroma of braised pork belly and 5-spiced chicken hummed thick in the air at Gary's house, a rich, savory cloud that made Mandy's stomach clench with a hunger she hadn't felt in days. Before her, on the polished mahogany table, sat the small, chip bowl. Inside was a watery, translucent gruel plain congee, with not a single shred of meat, or even a fleck of green onion to grant it substance. Across from her, her second son, Gary, and his wife, Mara, devoured their feast with audible satisfaction. They tore into juicy chicken wings and piled their bowls high with gleaming rice, the clinking of their chopsticks a sharp, mocking rhythm against the silence of Mandy's own spoon scraping the bottom of her bowl. "You should be grateful, Mother," Mara said, a voice syrupy sweet but her eyes holding a glint of steel. She dabbed her lips with a napkin. "Rich, oily food is terrible for someone your age. Bad for your blood pressure. We're looking out for your health." Mandy said nothing, her gaze fixed on the grains of rice floating in her bowl. Health. The word was a bitter joke. Her leg, still throbbing from the accident, was a constant, searing reminder of her fragility. Mara's smile tightened, honestly. "Sitting around all day, you don't need the energy. It's a wonder you don't get bed sores. Just eat your congee and try not to be such a burden." The words landed like stones, each one a calculated strike against Mandy's pride. Lazy, good for nothing, a burden. The labels they had branded her with echoed in the hollow space where her dignity used to be. As if to punctuate her point, Mara stood up and gestured toward the laundry area, where a mountain of clothes overflowed from a wicker basket. "And since you're finished eating, you can make yourself useful. Those won't wash themselves." Mandy's eyes widened slightly. She looked from the heap of soiled fabrics to her own heavily bandaged leg, propped stiffly on a stool. The effort of merely getting to the dining table had left her breathless and sweating. "Mara, my leg. I can't stand for that long." Mara let out an exasperated sigh, a theatrical display of impatience. "Oh, always an excuse. You can sit on a stool. It's better than doing nothing at all." Mandy's throat felt tight and dry. Could I have a glass of water, please?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mara's eyes narrowed. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, a cruel smile played on her lips. She picked up a pitcher from the sideboard, strode over to Mandy, and instead of pouring a glass, tilted it forward. Icy water splashed directly onto Mandy's face and down the front of her thin blouse, shocking the air from her lungs. It dripped from her chin, cold and humiliating. "There," Mara said, placing the pitcher back down with a sharp clack. "Now, you're not thirsty." A wave of utter helplessness washed over Mandy. She sat there, drenched and shivering, the water mixing with the silent tears that now streamed down her cheeks. This was her life now. A prisoner, stripped of respect, subjected to the whims of a daughter-in-law who despised her and the son who allowed it. Later, as Mara cleared the table, Gary finally spoke, not to his mother, but to his wife. "We're taking her to Annie's tomorrow," he grumbled, picking at his teeth with a toothpick. "A day early. I can't take another week of this. Honestly, raising a dog would be easier." The words, not meant for her but heard all the same, were a fresh wound. A dog, that's what she was to him. Less than a dog. The car ride the next day was jarring and silent. Gary drove with an impatient rhythm, braking sharply and accelerating too quickly, as if eager to shed his cargo. Mandy clutched the door handle, her body aching with every jolt. A small, foolish part of her held on to a sliver of hope. Andy was her eldest, her favorite. She had poured her resources into him, gifted him and his wife, Kathy, multiple properties, and set him up for a life of comfort. He wouldn't treat her like this. He couldn't. They pulled up to a pristine two-story house with a manicured lawn. Andy and Kathy were already waiting on the porch, their faces arranged in practiced smiles of welcome. "Mum, you're here a day early," Andy said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. Kathy stepped forward, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It's so good to see you, Mother Goodman. We've been preparing for your visit." But as Mandy shuffled out of the car, leaning heavily on Gary for support, Kathy's expression curdled. Her eyes swept over Mandy's simple, worn clothes and the lingering damp patch on her blouse. Her nose wrinkled in faint disgust. "Andy, honey," a word, she murmured, pulling her husband aside. They hushed. Frantic whispers carried on the wind. "The children so dirty, smell, can't have her in the house." Mandy felt a cold dread seep into her bones, colder than the water Mara had thrown on her. When Andy turned back, he refused to meet her gaze. His face was a mask of strained apology. "Mum, we have a bit of a problem with space," he stammered, his eyes darting everywhere but at her. Kathy stepped forward, her voice firm and unapologetic. "My children have allergies, Mother Goodman. And frankly, your condition, I can't risk their health. It wouldn't be hygienic to have you inside." The cruelty of it stole Mandy's breath. She had held these grandchildren, sung them to sleep, bought them their first bicycles. Now, she was a contaminant, a threat. "Then where will I stay?" Mandy asked, the words catching in her throat. Kathy pointed toward the far corner of the backyard, to a structure half hidden by overgrown bushes. It was a large, weather-beaten dog kennel, its wire mesh door secured with a rusty latch. "It's perfectly serviceable," Kathy said with chilling practicality. "It will shelter you from the wind and rain. We'll bring you blankets, of course." A dog kennel. Gary had said a dog would be easier. Now Ernie was offering her a dog's home. The betrayal was absolute. A physical blow that staggered her more than any injury. All the properties, all the money, all the years of doting on her firstborn, it had all led to this. A rusted cage in the backyard. "Andy," Mandy pleaded, her voice breaking, searching his face at any sign of the son she thought she knew. He shuffled his feet, his guilt warring with his weakness. "Kathy's right, Mum. We just don't have the room inside. If you stayed in the living room, where would the grandkids sleep? On the street?" He said it as if it were a reasonable comparison, a logical conclusion. Before Mandy could protest further, Gary had already deposited her bag by the side of the house. He and Meryl were back in their car, pulling away from the curb without a backward glance. Andy and Kathy gave her one last, fleeting look of pity mixed with relief before disappearing inside their warm, clean house. The front door clicked shut. The lock turned. From an upstairs window, she could hear the faint sound of children's laughter, pointing down at her. Abandoned and alone, Mandy stared at the door kennel, the symbol of her final worth. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and carrying the chill of the coming night. It was here, in this cage meant for an animal, that her favorite son had left her to rot. The cloying stench of damp fur and feces clung to Mandy's clothes as Zach unlatched the kennel door. He pulled her out with a show of gentle urgency, his face a mask of theatrical concern. Her legs, weakened by a disability she'd managed for years, trembled from the cold and the cramped posture. "Mom, I am so sorry," Zach murmured, draping a blanket over her shivering shoulders. "Gary and Andy, they've gone too far this time." "I had no idea." Mandy wanted to believe him. She let herself be guided into his clean, minimalist house, the warmth of the central heating a shocking comfort against her chilled skin. He settled her on a plush sofa, his touch a disorienting mix of care and control. "You just rest. I'll run you a bath. You're safe here. Mum, I'll make you your favorite braised pork with chestnuts. You'll be treated like you're in your own home." The words were a balm, and she drank them in like water after a long thirst. An hour later, clean and dressed in a soft robe Zach had provided, she sat at his polished dining table. The rich, savory aroma of the pork filled the air, a scent tied to happier, simpler times. But as Zach placed a steaming bowl before her, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's good to have you here," he began, his tone casual. "With the company assets all divided up, I hope you set aside a comfortable nest egg for yourself. After all you've done, you deserve it." A knot of unease tightened in Mandy's stomach. "I gave you and your brothers almost everything, Zach. You know that, almost." He pressed, his fork pausing midway to his mouth. "So there's something left." She looked down at her bowl, the delicious meal suddenly unappetizing. "I have a little over $100,000 in a savings account. It's all I have left for emergencies." The confession hung in the air, heavy and fragile. Zach's facade cracked. He put down his fork, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "I need it, Mum." Mandy's head snapped up. "What?" "Zach, no, that's my last resort. You promised you wouldn't. It's a guaranteed investment opportunity." He cut in, his voice rising with a familiar, desperate edge. "A sure thing. I just need some capital to get in." He avoided her gaze, his shame warring with his greed. "Look, I got into some trouble again. The tables were hot. Gambling." Her voice was a pained whisper. It was the same reason his wife had finally left him, the same black hole she'd poured hundreds of thousands into before. "I warned you. I can't, Zach. I just can't." His face hardened, the last trace of warmth vanishing completely. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. He stood up and took her bowl of untouched food, scraping it into the bin with a violent finality. "If you won't help your own son, you can sit here and starve." He left her at the table, the phantom scent of her favorite meal mocking her. The night passed in a blur of hunger and chilling silence. The next day, the unspoken tension was shattered by a brutal pounding on the front door. Zach's face went white. He grabbed his phone, which was already buzzing, and the man's voice, rough as gravel, erupted from the speaker. $3 million, Zach. You have 3 days. If I don't see it, we're not just breaking your legs. We start with your fingers, one by one, and we mail them to that pathetic old mother of yours. You understand me?" Zach hung up, his hands shaking, sweat beading on his forehead. The sheer suffocating terror in his eyes was something Mandy had never seen before. Later that afternoon, the impossible happened. Carrie and Andy arrived, and together, the three brothers approached her. Their expressions were somber, almost penitent. "Mom," Gary started, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "We're so sorry for everything. The kennel, everything. We were wrong. We want to make it up to you. Let us take you out for the day. Get some fresh air, please." A desperate, foolish hope bloomed in Mandy's chest. This was it. The phone call. Zach's terror had shocked them into realizing what was important. They had finally seen the error of their ways. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, her heart aching with a relief so profound it felt like a physical release. "Of course," she whispered, "I forgive you. You're my sons. I'll always forgive you." They drove for an hour, heading out of the city and towards the coast. The scenery was breathtaking, jagged cliffs plunging into a churning, sapphire sea. They helped her from the car and walked her to a secluded lookout point, the salty wind whipping through her hair. For a moment, it felt like a real family outing. "It's beautiful up here," Mandy said, her voice full of emotion. "It is," Andy agreed, his tone suddenly flat and cold. He and Gary moved to stand on either side of her, blocking her path back to the car. Zach stood behind them, his face a pale, unreadable mask. "Mom," Gary said, his voice devoid of all his earlier warmth, "we're glad you forgive us. It makes this easier. There's just one last thing you can do for us." He gestured vaguely towards the churning waves below. "You have a $30 million accidental death insurance policy. Zach is the primary beneficiary." The world tilted. The beautiful scenery dissolved into a terrifying, vertigo-inducing blur. The wind was no longer refreshing. It was a predator, trying to push her over the edge. What are you saying?" she stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He has a $3 million debt," Andy explained, as if discussing a simple business transaction. "This solves his problem and sets the rest of us up for life. It's the most valuable thing you have left to give." "No," Mandy gasped, a frantic, primal terror seizing her. She looked at their faces, the sons she had carried, nursed, and loved with every fiber of her being. The sons for whom she had sacrificed her company, her fortune, her dignity. "I'm your mother. I gave you everything. I worked 3 jobs when your father left. I paid for your cars, your houses, your mistakes. How can you do this?" Her pleas were meaningless, swallowed by the wind. Their eyes were hard, empty of love, empty of everything but a chilling, bottomless greed. "You gave us a lot, Mom," Zach said quietly from behind them, his voice finally steady. "It's time for your final contribution." Ignoring her desperate sobs, Gary and Andy each took one of her arms. They began to force her forward, her disabled legs stumbling on the uneven ground, moving her relentlessly, step by agonizing step, toward the edge of the cliff. The whine on the cliff edge was a physical thing, a cruel hand that tore at Mandy Goodman's tailored jacket and whipped strands of gray streaked hair across her face. It carried the scent of salt and impending doom. Her 3 sons stood before her, not as the pillars of her life she had raised them to be, but as a tribunal, their faces carved from stone. Carrie, her eldest, the one she had groomed to take over the Ettram group, spoke first. His voice was devoid of the warmth she'd cherished, replaced by chilling pragmatism. "Did you really think the logistics division collapsed on its own, Mother? A company that size doesn't just fail. I bled it dry, project by project. For 3 years, it was the only way to convince the board you were losing your touch, the only way to make you step aside." The words struck Mandy with the force of a physical blow. She staggered back, one heel catching on the uneven ground. Sabotage. Her own son, Zach, her second, the one she'd always bailed out, stepped forward with a resentful sneer. "And you made it so easy," he whined, his voice thick with the self-pity she now saw was his defining trait. Every time I called, you sent the money. Just this once, Zach. But it was never once, was it? You funded my gambling, fueled it. You're the reason I can't stop. This is your fault as much as it is mine. He gestured to the vast, empty space around them as if it were her creation. A cold dread began to seep into Mandy's bones, heavier than the damp sea air. She turned her gaze to her youngest, Andy, her baby. He wouldn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the crumbling precipice. Andy, she whispered, her voice cracking. Kathy is threatening to leave me, he said, the words bitter and clipped. She says she can't stand being in the same family as you anymore. That you suffocate everything. She gave me an ultimatum. Mum, you or her. I'm choosing my wife. I'm choosing my own family. The last thread of hope snapped. It wasn't a mistake, a misunderstanding. It was a verdict. Her life's work, her devotion, her bottomless well of love had been poured into 3 empty vessels who saw her only as an obstacle. A profound, aching void opened in her chest. The horrifying truth settled over her. They had never loved her. They had only loved what she could give them. Why? The word was a shattered plea. Gary's smile was the final, devastating blow. It held no remorse, only the grim satisfaction of a plan reaching its conclusion. For the insurance, mother, and for our freedom, then, they moved, not 1, but 3 sets of hands, the same hands she had held when they were small, the hands she had taught to tie their own shoes pressed firmly against her back. The shock was absolute, paralyzing her for a fatal second. There was no struggle, only a sharp, collective shove. Gravity took her. The world became a blur of grey sky and churning sea. The wind screamed in her ears, but it was drowned out by a single, ragged cry torn from her own throat. A name she had so rarely spoken with the love it deserved. Dorothy, as the cold, indifferent water rushed up to meet her. Her lust-conscious thought was a curse and the question, is this my penance? Is this the price for a lifetime of loving the wrong children? A gasp tore through her, raw and desperate, as if she were breathing for the first time. Her eyes flew open, not to the rolling grey sea, but to the blinding glare of vanity lights. The scent of salt was gone, replaced by the cloying sweetness of hairspray and expensive perfume. The wine was a low, artificial hum from an air-conditioning vent. She was sitting in a plush velvet chair, her body clad not in a wine-whipped jacket but in an elegant, form-fitting evening gown of deep emerald silk. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, disorienting silence. She lifted a trembling hand to her chest. She was whole, dry, alive. Where was she? The room was a sterile, backstage space. Mirrors lined the walls. Her rack of clothes stood in the corner, and through the heavy curtain, she could hear the muffled murmur of a large crowd. A light rap on the door was followed by the entrance of her young secretary, Clara, who held a leather-bound folder. Miss Goodman, are you all right? You seem to be asleep for a moment. You're on in 5 minutes. Mandy stared at her, her mind struggling to bridge the gap between the jagged cliff and this luxurious dressing room. Clara, what is the date today? Clara blinked, a flicker of concern in her professional gaze. It's October 26th. Miss Goodman, the Ethereum Group's 20th anniversary gala. She stepped forward and placed the folder on the vanity table. Everything is prepared. Your speech is on top, right before you announce Mr. Gary Goodman as the new chairman. The words hit Mandy like a bucket of ice water. The 20th anniversary. Announced Gary as chairman. The nightmare wasn't a nightmare. It was the future. It was the consequence of the very decision she was about to make. The cold confessions of her sons, their remorseless eyes, the feeling of their hands on her back, it all came rushing back. Not as a fading dream, but as a chillingly vivid premonition. This was the moment, the pivotal point where her blind love set her on a direct path to that cliff. She had been granted an impossible second chance. The trembling in her hands stopped. The confusion in her mind sharpened into a blade of ice-cold clarity. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, saw the powerful woman who had built an empire from nothing. Not the foolish, sentimental mother who had nearly let it be her tomb. The lines of grief and shock on her face hardened into a mask of pure, unyielding resolve. Clara gestured toward the folder again. "Miss Goodman, the teleprompter is loaded with the text. Should I give the stage manager the final cue?" Mandy slowly raised her eyes to meet the secretary's in the mirror. She pushed the folder away with the back of her hand, the soft thud on the table echoing the finality of her decision. Her voice, when she spoke, was low, steady, and utterly transformed. "No need to say more," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I know exactly what I'm doing." The clink of crystal against crystal was the only sound Gary Goodman allowed near his VIP table. Flanked by his younger brothers, Andy and Zach, he raised his champagne flute, the golden liquid shimmering under the grand ballroom's chandeliers. The Ethereum Group annual meeting was a mere formality. Their victory was already assured. To the new chairman, Gary toasted, his smile a predatory slash. "And to a future where we finally get what we deserve," Andy and Zach echoed the sentiment, their wives clinging to their arms, already mentally redecorating the chairman's offices. They were a portrait of smug entitlement, so absorbed in their imminent triumph that they almost missed the quiet figure slipping into the hall. Dorothy Goodman moved like a ghost through the sea of couture gowns and bespoke suits. Her simple, knee-length navy dress was an island of modesty in an ocean of extravagance. She clutched her small purse, her gaze fixed on the floor, trying to make herself invisible. But to her brothers, she was a spotlight of shame. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," sneered Gary's wife, her voice dripping with venom. Security should have stopped her at the door, Andy added, waving a dismissive hand. "Dorothy, this is a private event. You weren't invited. Go home before you embarrass us further." Zach laughed, a cruel barking sound. "Maybe she's here for the catering staff interviews." "They're in the back, sweetheart." Each word was a calculated strike, designed to wound. Dorothy flinched, her face paling as heads turned and whispers began to ripple through the nearby tables. She stood frozen, a lone target in the crosshairs of her family's scorn. From the entrance, Mandy Goodman watched the scene unfold. Every sneer directed at her daughter was a knife in her own heart, twisting with the fresh, agonizing memory of her own past cruelty. She saw not a pathetic stray, but a young woman of quiet strength, enduring humiliation with a dignity her sons could never comprehend. The regret that had haunted her since she'd woken in that hospital bed now solidified into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. Justice was no longer an abstract concept. It had a face, and it was her daughter's. Ignoring her son's startled calls, Mandy walked past their table without a glance, her path direct and purposeful toward the stage. The murmuring crowd fell silent as she ascended the steps and stood at the podium. The spotlight found her, illuminating the severe lines of her face.